The May 8th, 2023 regular Wasilla City Council meeting is called to order. The time is 6 p.m. Before we begin, council, please put away cell phones. If you have personal business during the meeting, please move for a recess. If you are participating telephonically, please mute your phone unless speaking. Also, when speaking, please state your name for those streaming the meeting. As a reminder to all attendees, this meeting is being streamed live. The camera is located directly in the back of the council chambers above the clock. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Sullivan Leonard.
Here.
Councilmember Graham.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Vlock.
Here.
Councilmember Rubio.
Here.
We do have a quorum, Madam Mayor, with all council members participating in person in chambers.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Vlock, will you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. Are there changes? At this time, I would like to move Resolution 2316 to new businesses.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move from the consent agenda, items 8.4.4, resolution serial number 2318, and 8.4.5, resolution 2319 to new business.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. We are now at special orders of the day. And we are, Director Bell. This is an award presentation to the Alaska Valley Thunder 16U Tier 2 Boys Hockey Team as USA Hockey National Champions for 2023.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, we're very proud to host the Alaska Valley Thunder 16U National Champions. Quite a sentence right there. We're all very proud from the Menard Sports Center staff. I know you guys spent a lot of hours over there working really hard and following your fantastic coach, Jamie Smith. So at this time, Jamie, if you could come up.
First of all, just real quick, this has been a work in project, I'll tell you that. We've been doing this for the last 33 years coaching the Matsu Valley. Sean and myself are both born and raised here, and we got a special group this year. And we've had some of these guys on and off for the last 4 or 5 years. We've accomplished a couple things, many things, with this group of kids. And one of them being, this is their 3rd straight state championship in the Matsu Valley. We formed the Valley Thunder approximately 6 years ago, and it was to get the best players and tier them on the best teams. And with the 3 organizations that are involved, the Junior Avalanche organization, the Maha organization, as well as the Palmer organization, we were able to come to an agreement, and we're in our 6th year, and we know it's working because Anchorage is sniveling like crazy. But this year we were in the state championship out of 5 levels. We were in the state championship game 4 times. We won 3 of them. And so anyway, I know some of these guys are trying out for Tier 1 teams. We're a Tier 2 team, which we're better than the Tier 1 team. But anyway, we're a Tier 2 team, and some of our kids had tried out for Team Alaska. And I called their coach the other day and I said, "Hey, Merritt, how are my guys doing?" He's like, "I am picking every Valley Thunder kid that I possibly can, so we can win and you cannot." So anyway, we know we're doing the right thing, and he was kidding, but he did say, "Hey, you guys are doing the right thing there. We can't figure it out in Anchorage, so keep doing what you're doing." And it's all about development. Our kids are doing a fantastic job, and like I said, it's their 3rd state championship in a row. And we knew we went down 5 or 6 days early, and I'll be quick here, but 5 or 6 days early, and we prepared for the national tournament. We played some exhibition games, did very well against the top teams in the country, and we won 2 out of the 3 games. And then we got into the tournament, went 6-0, and it was, and trust me, not one game was easy. I turned to my assistant coach, and when you play within the state and you have a superior team, it kind of becomes easy a lot of the time. Well, you get to a national tournament, it doesn't become easy. And Sean turned to me and he said, Jamie, every one of these teams is a state champion. We're playing 16 state champions. So it resonated a little bit. And with this group, like I said, special group, they made history. I was born and raised here. I grew up playing hockey in the Mat-Su Valley. And like I said, coached the last 33 years and never have been to a national championship game. And not only did one of our teams, but 2 of our teams got to the national championship in the same year. And our 14 team lost in a shootout, which is a tough way to end it, but ended up second in the nation. So anyway, I'd like to call up the players on our team. Easton McCree, come on up. Sawyer Kelpie. Robert McLucky. Jamie O'Brien. Carson McGrew. Braden Spain. And our captain, Mason Holler. Matthew Ross. Brody Richards. Elijah Von Guten. And the leading scorer in top 5 player first team, Daniel Matby in the national tournament. Fonzie Effenoff. Domnan Effenoff. And we're missing a couple other guys, but these guys, if you take a look at this group, they all dual participate. So they're all playing soccer or baseball or doing something right now within their schools. And there's a representation from every school in the Mat-Su Valley as far as high schools go, traditional high schools, Palmer High School, Houston High School, as well as Wasilla High School and Colony. So anyway, thank you guys. I appreciate it for the support.
All right.
We are definitely missing a few players.
Okay, cheers.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Coach. Oh, my goodness. Thank you.
Yes, how do we want to do that? Get a picture with all the team?
Come up.
Come on over here.
Big lady. Stand around. Yeah. Would you guys come around the dais, years ago?
Squat. Kidding.
Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry.
I'm short.
Yeah, we know.
They're huggers, they're okay.
Okay. Your guys.
On one knee.
1, 2, 3.
Hold on, we have some more.
So be on Facebook in 30 seconds.
Congratulations, guys. We're all real proud of you. Okay. And now I will read the proclamation recognizing May as Older Americans Month. City of Wasilla proclamation recognizing May as Older Americans Month. Whereas every May, the Administration on Aging, part of the Administration for Community Living, leads our nation's observance of Older Americans Month. And whereas the 2023 Older Americans Month theme is Aging Unbound, which offers an opportunity to explore diverse aging experiences and discuss how communities can combat stereotypes. And whereas the city of Wasilla includes a growing number of older Americans who contribute their time, wisdom, and experience to our community. And whereas communities benefit when people of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds have the opportunity to participate and live independently. And whereas the city of Wasilla recognizes the need to create a community that offers the services and supports older adults may need to make choices about how they age. And whereas the city of Wasilla can work to build an even better community for our older residents by not limiting our thinking about aging, exploring and combating stereotypes, and emphasizing the many positive aspects of aging. Now therefore I, Glenda D. Ledford, Mayor of the City of Wasilla, do hereby proclaim May 2023 as Older Americans Month in Wasilla and urge every resident to celebrate our older citizens and help to create an inclusive society and accept the challenge of flexible thinking around aging. Dating this 8th day of May 2023. Okay, come on guys.
Carol, where are you at?
Come here, Carol.
Okay.
Okay, you can see everybody. Good, thank you.
One more. Don't move.
Sorry.
One, two,
Wait.
one more.
No. All right. And we certainly appreciate all you older ladies and your contribution to the city of Wasilla. Okay, we are on to commission and agency reports. We are up to forming a Metropolitan Planning Organization for Mat-Su, Kim Sollien. She is the Mat-Su Borough Planning Service Manager. Welcome, Kim.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Ledford and members of the City Council. I was here about 6 months ago and gave you kind of an overview presentation of what a Metropolitan Planning Organization is and how we were preparing as the borough and the cities of Palmer and Wasilla and DOT were planning to form this organization. And the thing that we were waiting for in terms of formation was the urbanized area designation. So that has happened, and now we are on a clock to form the MPO within 1 year of that designation. So I'm going to go through a presentation that kind of gives an overview of what the MPO is and what it does, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions if you have any. And we'll just go from there. So let's see. So like I said, the Mat-Su Borough was designated as having an urbanized area. The U.S. Census made the designation after the 2020 census was certified. The name of our urbanized area is the Wasilla, Connect, Fairview, North Lakes Urban Area. When the designation came out, it didn't include a map, and so we kind of were scratching our heads about, well, what about Palmer? Is Palmer not in the urbanized area? And about mid-January, we got the maps, and yes, Palmer is also in the urbanized area. But basically, what the designation means is that our population threshold has reached the 50,000 people or more within a contiguous area with a density of more than 1,000 people per square mile. So as you all know, and you've lived here for a long time, maybe some of you forever, our population is growing and it is unprecedented, and there's a lot of changes and need in our community because of that growth. And one of the things we're going to need to do now that we have had such a population influx in the core area of the Mat-Su is form this Metropolitan Planning Organization. So if you haven't seen the maps, this is what our urbanized area looks like. We got this map from the census. and the shaded area highlights where we have that greater population density. What's interesting, I think, is when people think about urbanized areas across the country, we do not think about the Mat-Su core area as urbanized. We think of, I don't know, New York City or Seattle or some of these larger cities, but based on how the census does the calculation of people per square mile, we do reach that threshold. And for us, the average is instead of being densely developed, it's about 3.5 acres per household, 2.5 people per household, all added up in that area, reaching that 50,000 or more. I think our population is about 54,000 people within the urbanized area. So once the designation happens, like I said before, the federal government requires that a metropolitan planning organization be formed within 1 year of that designation. There's also a few other things that happen to communities when you get the urbanized area designation. I'm not going to talk about this tonight, but I'm sure I'll be back before you talking about the MS4 permit and the stormwater program. There's a requirement under the Clean Water Act to manage stormwater differently in the urbanized area. And so we're having some of those conversations at the staff level about what that's going to look like for the borough, especially for us. We don't have a storm sewer system. We have ditches and drainage ways, and so the borough's kind of scratching their head a little bit about how we're going to manage stormwater, but that's a different topic. Another thing that changes now that we have the urbanized area designation is that public transit and how public transit receives funding in the urbanized area is going to change. Right now, Valley Transit's our primary provider in the core area, and they receive funding through the state dedicated for rural transit providers. And now that we have an urbanized area, they will no longer be able to receive funding the way they have. And one of us, either the borough or the cities or one of the tribal governments, will need to stand up a transit program to collect the federal formula funds that will come our way and then deploy it to providers. So that's another behind the scenes conversation that we're having. I'm sure I'll be back in the future to talk about options and what the borough's thinking, because that'll definitely be new for us since we are not involved in public transit in any way. So a metropolitan planning organization is about planning. It's about figuring out where the transportation infrastructure needs to be in this urbanizing area, and it's about cooperating with the other local governments in the area to make sure where you're planning for your transportation infrastructure makes the best sense for the population. And so I think in 1962 is when the federal DOT formed the requirement to have MPOs for all urbanized areas. And there's about 600 or 460 MPOs across the country. And all the guidelines are the same related to MPO formation. Just once that trigger happens, they're required to form. So some of the plans that the MPO works on are not just for cars and roads, but we also look at bike and pedestrian facilities and public transit facilities. And this planning that the organization does will then allow us to be allocated a portion of federal funding to build that transportation infrastructure. So the local governments that are within our urbanized area, like I said before, include the cities of Palmer and Wasilla, the Mat-Su Borough, the DOT, and Chickaloon and Kinnick tribes. And we have been meeting behind the scenes for the past couple of years now, talking about how are we going to form this new organization, how are we going to work differently together on transportation planning. But you haven't probably heard much about us other than the presentation I gave a little while ago, because we hadn't got the urbanized area designation, and so we were kind of waiting in the wings to really kick things off, but we were planning, to be ready to do that. There was a question as to whether or not we would receive the designation, and we didn't want to go too far down the road of forming this new organization if we didn't get the urbanized area designation. So like I said before, MPOs are the bulk of their work is focused on planning. And so the MPO, one of the first orders of business once the organization is formed, is to complete a metropolitan transportation plan or a long-range plan for transportation infrastructure within the planning area for the MPO. So it's like a long-range transportation plan that the state has and the borough has, and I'm actually not sure if the city of Wasilla has one, but I assume you do. So it's looking at a 20-year horizon of where do we think we're going to need facilities and upgrades to support our public. And then we're gonna have to create a transportation improvement program, which is like the state STIP. It's where you program all the projects on a 5-year basis into a matrix that flow from your long-range transportation plan into your TIP. That's the 5 years of projects that you're gonna use to spend whatever amount of funding that gets allocated to the MPO over that period. And we have to update each of those plans every 5 years because our population changed, growth happens in areas that we didn't plan for, maybe other funds were used to complete projects and the MPO doesn't need to pay for those. And then we'll have to do a very detailed work plan every 2 years, and then have a public participation plan that's pretty robust. I think one of the reasons MPOs were created, the federal government realized they were putting highways across the country and really motivated on bringing in this big, transportation system across the country, and it divided communities, it damaged neighborhoods, people were impacted in a negative way, and they decided, okay, once a community gets to a certain size, that community really needs to have more say in where these federal dollars are going to go for that infrastructure, and that's why they were formed. So the public participation plan helps us talk to each other as local governments, but also to the public where these facilities, may either serve them or impact them. So as I said before, the MPO is funded. It comes with funding, so there'll be an annual allocation of about $500,000 to support the planning activities and the staff of the organization. And then we'll get roughly about $10 million a year to program for capital projects. So both of those funding allocations require a 9.03% match. So about annually, the participating organizations within the MPO will need to come up with about $40,000 to match the planning funds. And then depending on if the city of Wasilla gets a project programmed into the MPO, say you're going to pave a road and it costs $500,000. If your road gets programmed in, the MPO or the federal government will pay the, $450,000, and the city of Wasilla would roughly pay $50,000. So again, there is a match component where we'll have to participate, but it's a lot cheaper to use the MPO money than to pay for those projects all by yourself if you weren't part of the MPO. So that's one of the benefits that we're getting to direct those funds. Sometimes questions come up in terms of when the MPO is formed. Will the cities or the borough have to do a project? What if they don't have the match? What if they haven't set aside the funds to be able to cover those costs? We will adjust how the projects are programmed. So if it takes you a few years to save up the money to be able to cover the match for your new, I don't know which road it would be, a road upgrade or a new bus stop or a new pedestrian pathway, we would program your project so that you have the funds available to make that match on the timeline that works for you. The funds do have to be programmed.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
If you don't mind?
Sure.
Will you remind me, with the MPO formation and you look at the TIP, does that take precedence over then the STIP that the state has for projects?
So,
Or are we then taking a higher level then for our projects above the STIP?
yeah, through the mayor to council member Sullivan Leonard. Our projects, once we program them into the TIP, will go into the STIP, and so they'll be part of that package. So the state will hold all of our money, but we'll have an annual allocation that we get to spend, and so it will be on equal footing to get those projects programmed. The state won't be able to trump us and say, we don't feel like doing that project right now, MPO, you have to wait till next year. It'll be part of that, whatever that annual package is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just was trying to remember in my head just how that all pieced together, and I thought the STIP was kind of that priority piece.
But we'll have our projects, programmed right within it, so it'll be part of that package.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And is that money general fund money at the state or how?
So I'll talk about this in a following slide. The state is allocated, maybe it's this slide right here. So these are 2019 numbers, so they're not quite accurate. There's a bit more money coming into the state today, but the state gets about $542 million, at least in 2019, to program for transportation infrastructure. And so that green slice of the pie, the $153 million, that's what the state is using to do road projects all over the state. And if they feel like doing a project in Matsu or the city of Wasilla, then it happens. But now that we will have an MPO, we'll get a slice of that 153 million every year. And so they've changed the name of the funding, the Surface Transportation Act funding. They call it something different now, and I don't have that acronym, but they'll get their annual allocation from the federal government and they'll carve up the pie, and the Matsu MPO will get its slice, just like the Fairbanks MPO will get their slice and the Anchorage MPO gets theirs. Does that answer your question?
No, I was just curious, what pot of money, is this general fund money? Subject to appropriation, or?
No, well, this is the allocation that the federal DOT.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but where does the money go? Anything that goes into the general fund
Goes into the.
can be,
I don't think the state can spend, like, this is how the state gets its allocation from the Federal Highway Administration, and then it goes into different pots. And so the green pot, the Surface Act Transportation pot of funding can't go other places. It has to be spent on transport.
it's like a pass-through funding mechanism. Thank you.
Great, good questions. So the MPO is governed like you all govern the city, like you're the governing body for the city of Wasilla. The MPO will have a policy board that will be made up of representatives from each of the entities that are part of the MPO. Normally for the policy board, they're elected or appointed officials from the representing government, but we'll also have a technical committee for the MPO that's usually made up of staff, public works directors and planning staff from the different organizations and transportation organizations to also be helping work through these plans and projects through the staff level, and then they'll bring them up to the policy board level for approval. And so every plan that's completed, every project that's nominated, any dollar that's spent by the MPO will go through the policy board for approval. The state DOT will also have representation on the policy board, so they'll get a vote as well. So right now, we have a pre-policy board, and Mayor Ledford serves for the city of Wasilla on the policy board. And we also have, there's the Mayor DeVries, Manager Brown, and Assemblymember Yunt is on the pre-policy board for the borough. Manager Musi is on for the city of Palmer. And then the DOT and Kinnick Tribe and Chickaloon Tribe have representatives, as does Valley Transit has a representative, and the Parks and Trails Foundation. And so that board is a bit larger than the proposed board for the future MPO, because we were all learning, what is this MPO? Who should be at the table as we talk about how we're going to form this organization? So the current policy board in the pre-phase is more diverse. But the list of membership that I'm showing you on the screen now is the proposal that the policy board voted on to have an all-government policy board recommendation, which will then need to be approved by the governor. But that's where we're sitting right now.
So your slide says Mananuska Borough, Mananuska should sit in a borough mayor or assembly manager. You mentioned both the mayor and an assembly manager, or an assembly manager. So are there 3 representatives from the borough then, or are there 2?
This is, thank you for the question. This is where it gets a little confusing with the pre-MPO and the future MPO. So right now, the borough does have 3 seats on the MPO policy board, and they advocated for that, and the pre-policy board accepted the borough having 3 seats. Once we started forming what our MPO was going to look like in the future, the steering committee and the policy board voted that the borough would only get 2 seats, not 3 seats. Okay. So like I said before, the MPO will need to be formed, and that formation happens by an agreement with the governor's office and the participating local governments who are agreeing to be part of the MPO. And so right now, we are very close to finalizing the package that will go to the governor's office for them to review to form our MPO. And so that package needs to include the operating agreement, which is a technical document that outlines who the participating governments are, how we're going to work as an organization, how we're going to do our reports, how we're going to do our reimbursement to the state of Alaska, because the state will reimburse, will submit bills to the state and they'll reimburse us through a process. So that's the document that outlines those pieces and parts. Then we have our bylaws document that outlines who's going to be on the policy board, how is the policy board going to operate, how are they going to vote. In addition to that, how does the steering committee or the technical committee operate, and who are the seats that are going to be on that. Those are both in final draft form at the Attorney General's office, and so they're waiting final approval from the state. The pre-policy board did vote to have our MPO be a nonprofit organization. Like I said, there are 460 MPOs across the state. They're all governed and organized a little bit differently. And when we were in the initial conversations, the Mat-Su Borough, being the larger government with a larger chunk of the population and responsibility, it was logical to think that they might want to house the MPO and have it be, sister it, like fiscally sponsor it. But we decided that it made more sense for the MPO to have autonomy. And so when the MPO meets, all the representatives from the governing bodies that are part of the organization put their MPO hat on, and they're meeting as an MPO and making decisions as an MPO. We just didn't want to, the borough manager and mayor felt like we didn't want to make it seem like the borough was trying to control anything, so we wanted it to be separate. So we voted on that, so we are, working on the nonprofit incorporation paperwork, that once the governor says, yes, you MVP for transportation, you are the new MPO for Mat-Su, we'll submit that paperwork. Couple pieces that are left with the operating agreement that we haven't completed yet are the boundary for the MPO, the area of which the MPO will do its planning work, and then resolutions of support from the participating organizations. And that's some of my asks tonight, is for you all to consider supporting, passing a resolution of support to be part of the MPO and agreeing to these foundational documents that we've created. I didn't bring a copy of those tonight because they're not done, but I'll be back. So you'll have a chance to look at those. So what defines the MPO boundary? So like I showed you on the map before, we have the urbanized area designation. There's an expectation, and it's outlined in federal code, that the MPO boundary, or the Metropolitan Planning Area, will have a 20-year horizon, looking towards where do we think, it'll include the whole urbanized area, and then where do we think will become urbanized over the next 20 years. And so we've been working behind the scenes, looking at population projections and platting actions and dwelling units and GIS to count up where we think we're going to add more population over the next 20 years to make a projection or prediction of where we want our MPO planning boundary to be. So we took the Department of Labor's 2019 population forecast, which says that we're going to add, I think it's 46,000 people to the borough in the next 20 years. We assumed that some of those people would move outside the core area, and so that's why we looked at where we're going to place these other 43,000 people over the next 20 years. Then we broke the area up into census blocks and ran a bunch of scenarios to figure out where we think the population might be dispersed. And so we looked at where are all the fastest growing neighborhoods and areas where people are really currently moving now at a rapid pace. We looked at all the undeveloped small parcels surrounding the urbanized area boundary, assuming it's already platted and organized and available for development. We assumed that would probably be a likely place where folks would go. We excluded, a lot of the large parcels or parcels that haven't already been platted because we thought that would take a number of years and might not meet our 20-year horizon. We also excluded all the borough, state, and federal land from this analysis because we also figured that might not meet our 20-year horizon. Long story short, in all the scenarios that we ran, this was the red outline, was the general area where we think that 43,000 people will go. Now, population might change. There might be an Amazon call center that happens in Meadow Lakes, and population will go that way. And so this is our best guess at where we think the planning area should be. Every 10 years, we'll have a chance to review our boundary because the census will release another urbanized area designation. Our urbanized area will probably grow. It'll look a little bit different, and we'll be able to measure, did we get it right? If in the future, if the MPO decides that the boundary isn't quite right, the policy board could decide to look at it at any time and revisit those lines. And so why we have to have this boundary is that, you know, the main work of the MPO is planning. And so if you're trying to figure out where this transportation infrastructure needs to be for your existing population and your growing population, you have to put some parameters on that. And so the MPO will be doing its long-range transportation planning within that boundary, but it doesn't mean the city of Wasilla, the city of Palmer, the borough, the state won't also be doing their own planning outside of the work of the MPO. They probably will, because we are only getting $10 million a year, but this is where our focus planning area will be. So the public comment period for the boundary map closed on April 29th, and so we're reviewing all the public comments that we received. We've got about 50 public comments about asking us to amend the boundary to include, for instance, GPRA recreation area, because that is a growing area. It is a bit outside, you know, it's farther away from the existing urbanized area, but it is a recreation area that's serving a large part of the population, and it's growing, and we might want to be able to plan for that area differently because we know that that's happening. I think there has been suggestions to bump the southern boundary of the MPO down to include the Palmer Hayflats boundary, just to make it administrative boundaries easy to follow, and then to also include, you know, bump the boundary down below Palmer to include that whole area. So it's just an easier boundary to manage. So we're looking at that behind the scenes with staff, and we'll review it with the steering committee and the pre-policy board probably at next month's meeting, and then be able to come back to you and present a final boundary, a final operating agreement, and final bylaws for a potential resolution from you all to support the MPO.
Madam Mayor, if I could ask a quick question.
Yes.
Sorry, you said GPRA?
Government Peak Recreation Area.
Okay, in which area were you defining that in?
So that's up in the Fishhook Triangle. So the top of the map, the Government Peak Recreation Area and some of those new subdivisions that are being developed are outside the existing boundary. And so we might consider bumping the boundary out to include the access to Mountain Trails Drive.
Okay, and then just to follow up, please, how far down did you go Kinnick Bay Road? And it looks like you've got kind of the red boundary there for potential expansion down that way, because, you know, that, I mean, I live on KGB, but it's just the population has exploded, so.
Right. You're making me realize I need a different map in my presentation because another community member asked, and I can't quite remember the road. It's beyond it's beyond Settlers Bay, but I'm not sure how far beyond Settlers Bay that boundary is shown.
Knick-knack mud shack, maybe?
I can't quite remember. I
I
apologize.
think it is Knick-knack Mud Shack.
Because you've got the school district right there. I'm sorry, 2 schools.
Okay, you're making me remember there has been a conversation to bump out a little bit to include those 2 schools and the busing area around the 2 schools that are down on that side of the boundary.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I think my next, well, here, I'll go back to those slides. So we have a website, and I think our interactive map is still up. It's mvpmpo.com, and if you go into the if you click into the boundary development, it's not showing on this screen. There is an interactive map, and it has all the streets and all the and you can zoom way in and see exactly where that boundary is. I just wanted to highlight this, that all of our past meetings, all of our past recordings, any of the documents that we've created are all here, as well as all the federal regulations that require us to form an MPO and the timeline and all those pieces and parts. So as I mentioned before, we are hoping for resolutions of support from all the participating organizations over sometime within the next 4 to 5 weeks once we finalize the operating agreement, bylaws, and the boundary. And so we're hoping that you'll be willing to support, offer a resolution of support. Because we're going to form a nonprofit corporation, we'll be also looking for you to name whoever you select for the policy board to serve as a member of the nonprofit corporation board. And so I've provided Eric a draft, your public works director, a draft resolution for you to look at in the future, and you'll see where there's a few different slots. You certainly can change it however you like. The one thing I will say is that in the federal regulation is very clear on certain things and gives some flexibility on other things. And for small MPOs, which is what we'll be, there is flexibility on who can be involved in the MPO and how big the policy board can be. But what it does say is that the policy board and the organization must be made up of the local government that represents 75% of the population, the largest city, and DOT. So it kind of forces the city of Wasilla to be part of the MPO in that federal guideline. The city of Palmer could choose not to be involved. The issue with choosing not to be involved is that there'll still be a planning area serving that area, and we'll still be programming things, but the city, if they choose not to be involved, just won't have a say in that $10 million and how it gets spent. So I just wanted to highlight that the policy board can be as big as we want, but it can only be as small as the borough, the city of Wasilla, and the DOT. In terms of just a quick timeline, like I said, we're trying to get the operating agreement sent to the governor's office in June. Hopefully it'll happen in June. It might be July. We expect it to take a couple months for them to review all the documents and bless the organization. We're trying to get ready to be able to receive federal funding on October 1st. And so that's why we're running a bit at this point and have such a timeline. Once the governor forms the MPO and agrees with our documents, we will, after the clock turns on October 1st, the policy board will look to hire staff, to rent office space, get the organization up and running, and start working on some of those long-range transportation plans that I said are the key work of the MPO. So hopefully sometime between, I would say, November and January, we'll have staff and have an office and be up and running, and I'll celebrate that the project that's consumed my life for the last 3 years has happened and it's well on its way. So I guess that's it. That's all I have for a presentation. I'll just go back to my website in case you have questions about that. And I don't know how much time I took, but I know you have a busy agenda, but I can stay for a bit if you have any other questions.
Mr. Crew.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Kim. Very informative presentation. If I look at your early slide here showing the urbanized or the urban areas that the census had designated, which is one of your early slides.
Back to it.
Yeah, that one there. You can see there are, to put it mildly, that is a non-contiguous area with some kind of one-off outliers out there. And
Yes.
the area you proposed, of course, draws all those in. But since the census, kind of designated these, I mean, are we, the area that you guys propose, is that, who's going to make that definition? Who's going to make that determination?
Through the mayor to Councilmember Graham, that's a great question. This map had us scratching our heads as well, because throughout time, the urbanized area definition considers it contiguous. And then this map was produced, and there were spaces and that little neighborhood way up there floating by itself. And so we didn't really understand what it meant. So the census did change how it defines its urbanized area, and it allows for hops and jumps. And I don't have the technical definition, but essentially within census blocks, if you have that population density that meets that threshold, and then within a half a mile up a road, it can jump to another neighborhood that meets that population threshold. And so I think that's what you're seeing in some of these breaks. There's some denser neighborhoods and then some less dense neighborhoods, but they're within that 1.5 mile along a roadway jump to qualify. So that's how the census did that. So we can't change that. That's what we were given for our urbanized area. So who decides on our metropolitan planning area boundary? Well, it will be our pre-policy board. So as I said before, we've drafted a map based on population projections and where we think the population will go. We've shared it with the public and invited public comment on, did we get it right? Should the boundary move over here or over there because someone knows about, you know, a new call center or a new school or a new housing development, and we should include that because that area will become urbanized over the next 20 years. So that's what we're trying to do, buffer the existing urban area with a planning area that we think within 20 years, that whole area will become urbanized. So once we take all the comments that we receive from the maps and the public, we'll present the new proposal to the steering committee and the pre-policy board for approval. And if the pre-policy board says, yes, we agree with that boundary, that will go into the package to the governor's office. And ultimately, the governor will say, okay, I agree with your boundary. Or they could make changes. They could say, no, you forgot something, or we don't like that you're going all the way up to GPRA. I don't expect that, but it could happen because really the governor is who is forming the MPO with the documents that we'll provide.
And a second question on funding again. You talked about, a couple slides later, you talked about the funding window, so to speak. That would go back one. That one right there, you know, so the work of the MPO was planning, you know, provide a transportation improvement program with a 4-year short-range project funding plan, and then you have this 2-year funding plan following up on that, and then you mentioned, you know, so much money over a 10-year period. So how is the federal government allocating that money? Are we once again looking at year to year waiting to get that funding, or are we going to be 4, 5, 6, 10 years out saying we've got this amount of money, we just have to figure out what's the best way to use it?
So through the mayor to Councilmember Graham, so yeah, you asked a lot of questions in that one question. So I have to go to start at the top and I'll come down. So the Metropolitan Transportation Plan is the long-range plan. And so that's looking at a 20-year horizon. Where do all these facilities need to be within that planning area? So we're going to need to do a household survey. We're going to have to interview or survey as many residents within that planning area as we can to find out where are they going? How many cars do they have? Do they work in Anchorage, or do they work in Palmer and live in Wasilla? And where do they shop? And how many children do they have? And the children drive. So we have to paint this picture of where is our current population going at this time. And then we have to look at where are we having congestion issues, where are we having connectivity issues, where are we having safety issues, and then we'll program a suite of roads into the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and that's there. Step 2 is to prioritize all of those 100 projects, let's say, that we put in our MTP. Prioritize them as what's the number 1 priority on down, and how much do they all cost? So the state's going to have to help us with those project cost estimates. And then knowing annually we're going to get $10 million a year from the federal government, then how do we program those projects knowing that we have $10 million or a bit more depending on the match, depending on whose facility it is. How can we do all those projects over time? So like I said before, the state gets $550 million annually. They have to spend it in certain areas, but they will have to give. We're meeting on Friday to outline their proposal for what they're going to give us annually and what they're going to give Fairbanks and what they're going to give Anchorage. Because right now they've just been splitting the pot. Anchorage is a big MPO, Fairbanks is a small MPO, and they've been giving them appropriate allocations based on population. The state won't get new money because we're an MPO, and so they're going to have to figure out how they divide their pie to give us our slice. But they will have to give it to us annually. If we don't program it in our TIP, they will happily take it back and use it wherever they want to. So it will be important for us to have projects lined up and to have our TIP approved and be ready to utilize those funds on an annual basis.
And will the funding, you mentioned $10 million a year, you know, and you're looking at a 10 or 20 year window. You didn't really mention how long that $10 million a year is guaranteed or thought of, you know, whether it's next year or forever.
Forever, as far as in my planning horizon, like it's been
So the question being, you know, the federal government says it's going to give us $550 million and $10 million of that has to be spent in the Mat-Su. Would that mean that the federal government was going to give us $540 million and is giving us an additional 10, or how does that work? I mean,
So the state gets its annual allocation based on math that I don't quite understand. So with that allocation, the state right now gets money to spend on rural areas and is required to give some of the money to metropolitan planning organizations in the urbanized areas. And so it cuts the pie and does that. But it still uses the rest of the money wherever it wants. Now that once our MPO is formed, it'll have to give us our slice and then figure out how to spend the rest of its money wherever. So unless our population shrinks, we lose our urbanized area designation and our MPO dissolves, the expectation is annually forever we will get this allocation of funds. The state or the federal government could increase the allocation. We did hear from a representative from the Federal Highways Administration that she thought, since Mat-Su was going to be adding an MPO to Alaska because of our urbanized area designation, that the state might receive slightly more money than they had to allocate towards us, but we don't have any documentation of that. It was just at an annual meeting. So.
and the NPO money is only for surface transportation. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, not for ferries or airports.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions for Kim? Seeing none, Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now, is there a student representative from Burchell High School? Seeing none. Okay, we're gonna take a brief at ease of, what, 3 minutes? Joan, you're next.
That's what it is, right? Unlimited.
At 6:54, and our final presentation this evening is from Finance Director Joan Miller on the fiscal year 2024 budget.
Good evening, Joan Miller, Finance Director. It is my pleasure to present to you tonight, Council and the general public, our proposed FY 2024 supplemental budget. What you will hear tonight is a budget that acknowledges the current economic climate. It will acknowledge the expansion and modernization of the utility systems that is paramount to delivering on the commitments we have already made and to enable our future development. It's important to remember that this operating budget reflects spending to use and enhance and protect over $222 million in assets stewarded by the many departments of the city. On behalf of our community, the city owns land, parks, reservoirs, distribution systems, collection systems, streets, sideways, pathways, buildings, vehicles, major pieces of equipment. Part of the operating budget we will review in the coming evenings maintains, updates, and replaces that $222 million set of assets. It will also reflect on the 137 employees called human capital and the cost to attract, train, and retain that human capital. So tonight, we will start by remembering the city's mission. Ensure that we agree this is a balanced budget. Complete a high-level overview of the total operating revenues and expenditures, and then touch upon the highlights of the individual funds. It is the mission of the City of Wasilla to provide optimum service levels to the public as cost-effectively as possible, and to ensure a stable, thriving economy and promote a healthy community and provide a safe environment and quality lifestyle and promote maximum participation in government. So in looking at our balanced budget, our total source of funds, these are operating funds for the entire City of Wasilla, we are at $33.4 million. Total use of funds is $29.2 million, which then results in a net sources over those uses of $4.1 million. Our operating expenditures are below our operating revenues, and I believe this delivers a balanced budget. The budget also goes further to request capital outlay of $9.1 million in locally funded infrastructure enhancements changes, which would result in the consumption of $5 million in net position, committed capital project funding. So we're going to spend the next few minutes really talking high level. So this is going to be operating revenues and expenditures for the city as a whole. This will set the stage for what's happening in most of the funds, which we will later talk and touch and highlight on those specific funds. So operating revenues are projected to be $33.4 million, an increase of almost $3.6 million. In this slide, and though it might be hard to read, you can see in the graph, the big blue section is sales tax. We are a single sourced entity. It is 69% of our total operating budget. And as you can see, sales tax, so in the operating revenue by category, the increase that we're seeing here from the proposed amended budget to the proposed 2024 budget is solely with sales tax. So if there is one number I need to get right in this budget, it would be sales tax. So how do I feel comfortable increasing from such a significant jump from our prior year budget? So I look more at our actuals. So the proposed budget is, yes, 14% higher than the 2023, but it is only 4% higher than the fiscal year 2022 actuals. And you can see the growth. Additionally, in FY 2023, our collections to date for sales tax are $19.8 million, and we have 2 entire months of reporting left before we close out the fiscal year. I estimate that our fiscal year 2023, we will arrive at 23.8 million, which means that this budgeted 2024 revenues are flat to 23 to our actuals. I've not included any escalation in that number, just to be conservative, considering some of the financial projections that are out there that are all over the board, whether we're in the beginning of a bull market or we are looking to have a slight contraction of the economy. So I feel like it's a conservative, solid estimate for 2024.
Madam Mayor, do you mind if we ask questions?
Joan,
If that's
it's your
okay.
call. You want to
That's
do,
fine. Is that okay? Okay. I'm just wondering how much inflation ties in with this, with the higher number for the projection of 28.4 million versus what we have for what you're projecting, kind of around an actual. I mean, a difference of 4 million is quite significant, so.
Right. So if I'm, to Councilmember Sullivan Munner through the mayor, so if I'm understanding you correctly, the delta between 23 and 24?
Mhm.
So right now, we are averaging, I would say about 7 or 8% over fiscal year 2022 actuals. Okay, so we're this year it will be a great year. We will end up somewhere around 23.8 million. So really the question becomes, do we feel like the economy is going to contract? With CPI where it's at, with the cost of products, I don't believe that we're gonna see that much contraction. We are the single point of commerce for the entire valley.
Absolutely, and if I'll just do a quick follow-up, Madam Mayor, and then I'm done. So I guess I'm trying to see then how we went from 27.4 million in actuals for 22, but then we're at 24, so we dropped 3 million. How does that, I mean, how do we quantify that?
And so,
I'm doing comparison between FY '22 and then FY '23.
right, and so I think the previous budget was based on the previous proposed budget. And so it didn't account for the fact that actuals were coming in much higher than our proposed budget. So if I was to look at the document for FY 2023, the last year's budget, it is based on the previous year's proposed. And what we're doing is we're closing that gap between proposed and where we actually ended up.
Right, and I appreciate that very much. I'm just, that's okay. Well, let me see the rest of the presentation. I won't bug you too much, sorry.
So just some additional commentary with regards to the operating revenue. So as I highlighted, 69% of our overall operating revenue comes from sales tax. We do not have diversification in really any form. And we have hundreds and hundreds of businesses in our community that provide enriching services, that increase the vitality of our community. But there are a couple handful of businesses that keep our lights on, that keep operations flowing. We are so dependent on such a small group of businesses. And if any one of them had a business interruption, fire, solvency issues, earthquake damage, it would put a strain on the resources coming into the city. Do we have reserves? Absolutely. So we're being responsible and positioning ourselves for whatever interruption in revenue streams. But I really think it's important for us to really rein in on the fact that the diversification is a big inherent risk for our community. And also, you know, when you look at a single source revenue, it can affect your public policy. And I say that, for example, sales tax. Right now, under the current municipal code, things such as nonprofits, medical services, residential housing are exempt from sales tax. So how easy is it for you to steer yourself away from those things, which I think we all agree are an important part of the community, because they do not support the income that you need. You look at property tax, right? So property tax is known as a development stimulus, because a property owner who has a piece of land for which they have no direction and lays idle can't afford to do so if there is no property tax. But once a property tax is affected, that, and you have a reoccurring cost associated with that idle piece of property, you're more incented to sell it to somebody who has a plan for development. That too has issues because you can overdevelop, create a property tax that's so high that you generate too much growth, too much development, and end up, not forming your community the way you want to. So it's really important to understand that some of these finance policies, how they affect our overall development. Looking at revenue upside, so revenue sharing has consistently in the past been budgeted at 0 just because of the status of the state's budget. I have gone ahead and continued that lead or taken that lead. We received $237,000 in FY 2023, so there's potential upside in this budget for 2024. Investment income, right now it is budgeted at $350,000. Interest rates have been great, as you will see in one of my IMs this evening. We are currently at $813,000 for this year, and we still have a quarter remaining to be reported. So there could be some potential upside, but because the market projections are all over the board, I have played it conservatively and only included $350,000. Operating expenditures, this is where it gets fun. So the overall increase is 11% from the amended FY 2023 budget, or $3.1 million. The most significant increase is, by function, is public safety at 14%, or $1.7 million. In the graph down below shows you the operating expenditures by function. I think the intent of this is just, for council and the public to say, yeah, visually, that feels right as far as where we're placing our resources and what we want to deliver to our community. So we have public safety at 46%, recreation and culture at 17%, public works at 21%, and general government at 15%. And so general government is really a support unit. So I know with the federal government, they include, you can have a de minimis indirect rate at 10%, no questions asked. So 15% feels a reasonable balance to support all these other functions. So let's talk about operating expenditures. On this slide, you can see almost $21 million relates to personnel, $8 million for operations. So what's going on with personnel? So by either one of the 3 collective bargaining agreements or code, we provide a 3-year average CPI for wages. This year CPI at the end of the calendar year 2022 was 8%. With the previous years, that comes in at a 3-year average of 3.96%. Longevity steps, depending on which scale you are on, and your longevity could be anywhere from 2.25% to 3.5%. Health insurance is an increase of 7%, funded entirely by the city. There are some proposed additional positions and regrades, totaling approximately $363,000. They are a regrade of the museum curator. This was based on a wage study done by Northern Economics presented to council last year. I believe there were a handful of positions that were regraded based on the findings in that salary study. this is a follow-up to that. Convert one FTE acting investigator to a permanent investigator. Move one FTE code compliance from public works to public safety. Add one patrol officer. Add one FTE for a public works project manager. And a half an FTE for a library aide. Most of these position requests are due to work volume. So let's take a look at the personnel for public safety. When I go through the CPI, the STEP, looking also at the movement of code compliance to public safety and the addition of a patrol officer, I'm still left with a bit of a gap in where that increase is coming from. So looking back, so one of the things I think we have an issue is that we have never had to pressure test our personnel numbers for public safety because we have never been fully staffed. So meaning that you have vacancies that if you weren't on the mark, your vacancies would cover that and you would never know that you really hadn't properly estimated the cost of that position. Does that make sense? So when you look at fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2024, high-level litmus test, meaning just taking the personnel from the budget or from the actuals and dividing it by the total head count in that department, MatCom and PD. In FY 2021, it was approximately 136,000. FY 22 was 141,000. The proposed or the adopted budget for 2023 was also 141,000. And then for 2024, that is 160,000. So somewhere in this 2022-23 timeframe, we didn't see the escalation in the per average cost of the public safety positions. So I believe that we are now fully staffed and realizing that perhaps our previous numbers were below what they should have been.
Question? Thank you. Joan, remind me how many employees we have here for the city of Wasilla, please.
The city of Wasilla, it's 137.
Okay. 137, and then we're looking at adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5, is that correct?
2, it was 2.5. So just, there's some regrading in there.
Yes.
So you'd have your patrol officer, public works project manager, and a half-time library aide.
Very good, thank you.
Joan, excuse me, let me interject something right here. We are, for the first time in I don't know how many years, our police department is fully staffed.
Hey. Thank you, Chief.
So now moving on to operations. Of course, we have CPI at 8%, and we are feeling that from our vendors. However, this one is a little bit, the operations increases are obviously going to be attuned somewhat to CPI. But we have not taken any kind of an overall spread to operations. The changes within operations are really specific to each department. So for example, the remote seller's sales tax. We had legislation that came forward to you last meeting. So we're going to be increasing the FY 2024 budget because we know that we have higher revenues or anticipate higher revenues. We have parks employees that need CDL license. We have code compliance that wants legal for nuisance properties, fees for towing abandoned vehicles. So these are the types of things that we would cover in the series of department meetings over the next couple meetings. But there really isn't a particular one thing that's driving the operations increases. So let's take a look at the general fund highlights. So the general fund is the operating fund of the city and is used to account for all financial resources, except those required to be accounted for in another fund. Sales tax makes up 82% of the total general fund revenues. Here again, you can see that in FY 2024, we are proposing $23.3 million in sales tax projected revenues, which is up from the amended budget of FY 23 of $19.7 million. And that was similar discussion as we did at the operating level. General fund highlights for expenses. Again, here we are showing an increase before transfers of approximately $2.6 million. Of that amount, $1.7 million relates to public safety. So the fund stabilization policy for Wasilla Municipal Code 5.04025 targets unassigned fund balance between 50 and 60% of the next year's fiscal budgeted general fund expenditures. The unassigned fund balance target is in between the range of 10.1 million and 12.2 million.
Madam Mayor?
Sollien.
Joan, with regard to the fund stabilization policy, I know we've had this on the books for several years with regard to having that reserve at 50 to 60%. What are other cities doing? I know it used to be where you only kept like 3 to 4 months of reserve. So has that changed pretty dramatically to keep it more like at least 6-7 months worth of?
It really has, to Councilmember Sullivan Leonard through the mayor. No, we're seeing still the 3 to 4 months. So I feel really great about our fund stabilization policy at 6 or 7 months. I think that's, and I don't know if there are cities out there that are even more conservative. I mean, we certainly could be, and especially, I guess, if we were wishing not to do anything with regards to diversification, maybe then that's something we would consider as an option.
Thank you.
So general fund transfers happen either because they are in need of supporting the operations in other funds or to support capital projects. So in this year's general fund expenditure transfers, we have a total of $1 million going to operations. This is going to assist the airport, the Curtis D. Menard Memorial Sports Center, and youth court. There are $5.2 million in capital transfers. This is kind of a neat slide. So this is a very high-level general fund long-range plan. And, it's very conservative, very high level. I think the first few years, on the personnel, I tried to, capture the climate that we're working under as far as CPI. What this is telling us is that for at least the next 5 years, we can meet our operating expenditures with our operating revenues. But as you see the circle there for transfers for CIP, what we struggle with is to support significant capital contributions for a long range. And I think that's important to know as we think about our infrastructure needs. And this is where we may need to find a different, revenue source. So our special revenue funds account for the source and use of funds for the youth court and the federal and state asset forfeiture accounts. We currently don't have any allocations for the state, federal asset forfeitures, so those are all zeros. Youth court, they continue to be funded largely through a juvenile justice grant through the state of Alaska, as well as we just saw the transfer of $25,000 from the general fund to help support.
So Joan, how much, what amount of funding did we receive from the state, during the last allocation season for community assistance? Didn't we receive about $135,000 or $150,000?
Like revenue sharing?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
it used to be revenue sharing.
Yeah, so it was $253,000 in FY23.
And that's unaccounted for anywhere in these
Correct.
projections.
I budgeted zero, which has been the current policy in the last couple of years, so there's potential upside, good, reasonable
That's
potential
an
upside.
administrative policy.
No, I think it was just the state of the state's budget has left us concerned that community sharing wasn't going to occur. And I think there was, quite a bit of discussion about that in the past. It has been anywhere from like 123,000, and then it was quite into the 400,000 at one point. So I think it's the uncertainty of it. And so I left that as upside for 2024.
Thank you.
So, moving on to the enterprise funds. So these are used to account for operations that are financed and operated in a manner like private enterprise. There are 4 of them: sewer, water, airport, and the Curtis D. Menard Memorial Sports Center. The significant part of this side that I want to highlight is, of course, the capital expenditures that relate to either expansion or repair of existing assets. So with regards to water and sewer, we have an unassigned fund balance benchmark of 10% of depreciable assets. If we look here, at the end of 2024, sewer is at 4.4% and water is at 13.6% of its depreciable assets. Sewer is certainly harder, does not have the net position to really afford all the capital transactions related to it. It struggles because it has a much smaller customer base, but with all the same costs that water do. So water has had a decently healthy fund. And I think this is really interesting, in the finance world. Reserves are actually somewhat of a new thing, right? And so even Government Finance Officers Association, our kind of guiding board, doesn't have a set number as to how much you should have in reserves. What's interesting to me is here we have some pretty necessary improvements to sewer and how fast that reserve can go to 4%. And I think it's made me pause and think about the way we're reserving doesn't include expansion. So it might reserve for repairs, but it doesn't necessarily reserve for new infrastructure associated with that same service. So I think it's healthy to maybe look at if the 10% benchmark is sufficient, especially just in the development that we're experiencing right now. So the fiduciary fund is our cemetery fund. I just wanted to really note here that there is a capital project for $60,000, $30,000 in 2024, $30,000 in 2025, proposed to relocate the cemetery road to create additional plots. Additionally, you're seeing investment income of $6,000 this year. Because it is a non-expendable trust, I created a separate account under our AMLIP parent account, and all that interest will be charged directly to the fiduciary fund. Debt service, there are no plans in the FY 2024 to acquire debt. Capital project funds. So $31.5 million is being proposed in FY 2024. Of that amount, $5.7 million would be funded through a federal grant from the EPA. $6.6 million would be funded through a grant from the Matanuska-Susitna Borough, and $9.1 million is being proposed to be funded with local revenues. As you can see, approximately $16 million of the capital projects relates to sewer and water. That $16 million makes up 74% of the overall proposed spending for capital projects. This acknowledges our ongoing obligation. It recognizes our need to expand and create redundancy. It includes a $5.6 million grant from the EPA for sludge management, as well as I have fully funded the 20% match, or $1.1 million for this grant. There is some potential upside on that match. The EPA is a little slow to rolling these grants out, so they provided us some prior year documentation that was available, and there's some potential that pre-award costs may be able to be used as costs, so things that we've already incurred to date may be able to provide the match, in which case we would be able to reduce that $1.1 million. We also have $6.7 million from the Matanuska-Susitna Borough for the design of a Quick Connect and PRV booster station, which essentially would connect the city of Palmer water system with the city of Wasilla water system. And we also includes $100,000 for a mandated inventory of service line materials. So there's a big push nationwide for safe drinking water to inventory the materials used from the main line to the customer's house. Those are customer incurred costs. They are normally borne and done by the customer, so we don't have records of what those are. And so this is a mandate for us to, as a water utility, to take inventory of those. We don't suspect much lead and copper here in Alaska because of, our more recent development. A couple other capital projects just to note. We have our urban designation. You heard them talk about the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and then there are also the municipal separated stormwater system, which also comes into play. We wanted our citizens to know that we plan to still do the street paving project. There is $60,000 in there for lobbyists. This is to continue our mission to absorb as much federal assistance as we can to relieve some of the burden off our taxpayers for these big capital costs. Modernization, you will see an electronics records management system, as well as GIS asset mapping, and then maintain X upgrade. Almost to the end here. So technology replacement fund, So it is projected to have a fund balance of $860,000 at the end of FY 2024. Currently, the definition for this fund has been just to replace hardware. I would, under this budget, propose that we expand that definition to include expenditures of enterprise-wide software implementation and infrastructure costs. If that was approved in the 2024, working with our IT department and all the respective players, would do some discovery and research, determining if we even need to move to another platform. And then a full plan would be to come back to council if that was the determined path. So lastly, as you know, the environment keeps changing even though you've done a budget. So at the end of April, we were notified that will be receiving $30.8 million in water and sewer grants through Senator Murkowski's office as an earmark. We don't have any of the details, and it obviously came too late. So we have the 2.8 for stormwater management, 12.9 for our aging and undersized wastewater treatment center. We also have $15 million for improvements to our municipal water system. So how does this affect this budget? The projects that are in this budget were thoughtful, they were necessary, they were needs-based. So I believe that they are still all relevant. What this does do, though, is perhaps recalibrate our timing, because many of those projects may end up serving as match or serving or eligible under the grant. So I would propose, I'm still a proponent of approving those projects with the knowledge that administration and management would calibrate those projects and the timing of them to make sure that we make the most of that grant funding. So with that, I would just like to thank administration, my colleagues, the department staff for all their contributions, honest discussions, emotional discussions, and thank you, council, for your continued commitment to our community and efforts to remain fiscally responsible. We have budget meetings on May 10th, 11th, and 15th. Invite the general public to attend and learn a little bit more about local government. Thank you.
Is there any other questions for Joan? Seeing none, thank you, Joan.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, there are two ordinances scheduled for public hearing this evening. Madam Clerk, please read the title of the first ordinance and accompanying action memorandum.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ordinance serial number 2314, amending the fiscal year 2023 budget by appropriating $40,621 within the Vehicle Fund, Wasilla Police Department, Patrol Division for the purchase of a 2022 police package Chevrolet Tahoe with accompanying AM number 2317, contract award to Swickard, Alaska 2 LLC in the amount of $40,621 for the purchase of a 2022 police package Chevrolet Tahoe.
The public hearing on ordinance serial number 2314 is open. Anyone who would like to testify, please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2314 and AM 2317?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Brown, move 2314 and 2317.
Is there a second?
Rubio seconds.
It's been moved by Councilmember Brown and seconded by Councilmember Rubio to adopt ordinance serial number 2314 and AM number 2317. Is there discussion? Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could ask the chief, first, let me say this is great that you were able to find a vehicle that's available. You know, it was, according to the staff report here, it was a vehicle that was turned down by another department and has similar colorations to what we need and similar equipment to what we need to make it work. So I certainly appreciate your keeping your eyes open for that. But do you know what the difference is between buying this Chevrolet Tahoe and buying a similarly equipped Ford Explorer? So I mean, this one here, we're at $40,000 some odd dollars, $40,600. And I know we're going back in 1 year's purchase contract because this was ordered under 22, and so we're picking it up under that price, it sounds like, as opposed to the current state vehicle contract. But do you know those numbers?
To Councilmember Graham through the mayor, a 2022 Chevy Tahoe was state contract at $39,976, and a 2022 Ford Police Interceptor was at $40,743.
But that was the police interceptor package, not the basic police package, is that correct?
Yeah, they're all the police interceptors.
Okay, thank you.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, please take a roll call vote on the motion.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard,
Yes?
Graham,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Velock,
Yes.
Rubio.
Yes.
The motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2314 and AM 2317 passes unanimously.
Madam Clerk, please read the title of the second and final ordinance scheduled for public hearing this evening.
Thank you. Ordinance serial number 2315, amending the fiscal year 2023 budget by appropriating funds in the amount of $126,000 from the general fund, airport fund, sewer fund, and water fund balances to cover budget shortfalls for the Public Works Department.
The public hearing on ordinance serial number 2315 is open. Anyone who would like to testify, please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2315?
Madam Mayor, I move ordinance serial number 23-15.
I second that.
It's been moved by Councilmember Sullivan Leonard and seconded by Councilmember Velock to adopt ordinance serial number 2315. Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor, could we get a brief summary then with regard to this particular ordinance?
Eric?
Happy to, Madam Mayor. The ordinance breaks down the accounts from which the funding would be received, but basically it has to do with gasoline charges within parks, roads, airports, sewer, water. There's also some legal services in there, some inventory clearing within the sewer department, and some supplies within each section. So these are addressing shortfalls in several different purchasing sections to make the accounts whole as we go into the end of the fiscal year.
Very good, thank you.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Graham?
Thank you. As long as you got the microphone there. So, I mean, a lot of this is, just inflation, particularly the price of gas, but I am curious on line 26 and line 32, parks, general supplies. I mean, that's obviously, looks to me way more than to be an inflationary increase, and the sewer inventory clearing, is that dumping of no longer useful? So I'm not understanding the concept there.
Yeah, absolutely, especially on the sewer inventory clearing. That has to do with pre-purchasing of pumps and other equipment that we see failures in. So we pre-buy those pumps under the sewer inventory, and then when we use them, it moves into the financial account as being spent. And because of inflation and pump purchasing issues that we've had with our supplier, we can buy fewer pumps with the budgeted amount, and it first affects our inventory clearing. And so we're seeing increases in costs for pumps and other sewer supplies. As for the parks general supplies, that has to do with the growth in our maintenance structures within the parks. So we have our owl park crew, we have the maintenance staff. The costs with maintaining garbage and trash service and equipment to keep the parks up has gone up as well. So we saw a shortfall with our regular maintenance activities this last fiscal year.
And did the amount of activity increase? I mean, this is a significant chunk here. It's not an insignificant number there, but I mean, is part of this $20,000 because we're providing more service than we have in the past? And if so, what percentage of this is applicable to finding this new optimum level of service?
Sure. So most of that spending predates my arrival at the city, but my understanding is our level of service has increased. We have more staff out there doing those projects. So this was the outgrowth of increased service this last summer.
Thank you, sir.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. We are on to persons to be heard. It's a time for members of the public to share their views with the council. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. And the first one is Chris Tyree.
She's left.
Did she leave? Okay. Eileen.
Good evening. Eileen Falkenstein, representing Wasilla Area Seniors Incorporated. First thought is to thank City Council members and the Mayor for your continued support of Wasilla Area Seniors. That is much appreciated. Right now, our main event for May is our online auction, which is benefiting our Meals on Wheels program. We have over 225 items to be bid upon. These include gift baskets with gardening supplies, coffee break supplies, and some wonderful spa and beauty products. We also have gift certificates for local restaurants, some gift certificates for the Valley Cinema, Extreme Fun Center, and lots of outdoor adventures such as river raft, float trips, and fishing trips, and a Mahays jet boat adventure. We're also having raffle tickets for an $1,800 helicopter trip over the Knik Glacier and a night at the Knik Lodge. We have 500 tickets available for purchase. I don't know if any have been purchased so far, and they're $20 a ticket. We do have some tickets available this evening if anyone would like to purchase a ticket. When you support the auction, you're purchasing local and you're supporting the Meals on Wheels program. We appreciate that support immensely. We had our grand opening of the Mid-Valley Adult Daycare out in Houston for folks needing adult daycare. If you're interested in that, I do have brochures on that as well. In June, we'll be doing our Mouse for Meal 5K run, walk, stroll. We haven't designated a route yet because KGB is torn up, so we're working on that. You can also do it virtually. You can sponsor someone that's participating. You can participate yourself. That's available as well. That's June 24th. And that's what we've got going so far for WASI. Any questions? Let me know. If you would like to purchase a ticket for the raffle, let me know. And the auction is it is going now, and it ends on May 19th at 5 p.m. If there's something you really want, keep an eye on it and at about 4:45, start putting your bid in. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Jackie Goforth? Oh, she left too. Elizabeth Ripley?
Mayor Ledford, council members, my name is Elizabeth Ripley and I serve as president and CEO of the Matsu Health Foundation. I'm here today to comment on resolution serial number 23-16 to begin the process to rename Cruzy Street. First, I applaud the Wasilla High students who involved with this effort and commend their interest in civic engagement. Both my children graduated from Wasilla High and my husband taught there for over 20 years. The Ripleys are warriors through and through. The foundation understands this matter will move to the Planning Commission for further consideration. But we think it's important that both you and the commission have accurate information, and some of what you were provided in your packet is missing important details. The resolution states only 3 properties with Cruzy Street addresses would be impacted by the street name change. In reality, the Matsu Health Foundation building houses 17 entities, all of whom would be impacted. 3 of the 17 are part of the foundation. This includes Connect Matsu and Rock Matsu. All 3 have separate websites and printed materials that would need to be changed. The other 14 businesses in the building are tenants that will incur costs associated with the change as well. And most of these are small nonprofit organizations. Whereas the street name change would be a challenge for the foundation, it's a huge challenge for some of the tenants. A summary of those tenant challenges is in your packet. We proposed an alternative solution to Principal Jason Marvel. Just change the name of Cruzy Street to Warrior Street south of Bogard and leave the part to the north where the businesses are located as Cruzy Street. It's a win-win, giving recognition to Wasilla High and its warriors while also eliminating costly and time-consuming changes for the 20 businesses on Cruzy Street. The proposal states that Wasilla is the only traditional high school in Matsu without a street named after it. Matsu has 9 high schools, not counting correspondence. Of those, only 2 have addresses tied to the school. Houston High is on Hawk Lane, and Reddington is on Reddington Road. Palmer High's official address is on Bogard Road, but Palmer Moose Drive runs through the campus, and then the street name changes to Quill on the other end. So really, this is an example demonstrating our compromise solution would work for only renaming the southern portion of the road to Warrior Street. Lastly, the costs to businesses section of the proposal does not include all of the costs the businesses will incur, missing our website updates, marketing materials such as brochures, and the staff time needed to implement the changes to address. We respectfully ask this information be updated before this item goes to the Planning Commission. Thank you for your time in hearing my testimony today.
Okay, and next is Ann Kilkenny.
Good evening, Council. My name is Ann Kilkenny. I'm a city resident. I'm also here to speak on resolution number serial number 2316. I echo the things that Elizabeth Ripley has said. I also would encourage you to amend this to change only the portion of the street that wraps around Wasilla High. My concern is also for the history of the city. The Cruzys, the street was named after the Cruzys for a reason. Does anybody know? And have they been notified? I think we lose something when we start taking away and rewriting our history. I think we should keep that portion of the street, Cruzy Street. I think it makes sense to make the portion that wraps around Wasilla High Warrior Way. But so I encourage you to amend this to just rename a portion of the street and not all of it. Thank you.
Okay. Tom McDuffie.
Good evening. I too come in to talk about.
Excuse me, sir. Please state your first and
Oh,
last
sorry.
name for the record.
My name is Tom McDuffie. I'm the executive director of an entity called Cash Integrity Services that is currently at the Matsu Health Foundation building. So I come also to talk about Resolution 2316. Cash Integrity Services is a nonprofit that provides guardianship, conservatorship, and representative payeeship to the most vulnerable in our community, being the seniors and disabled people. I come today objecting to the name change of Cruzy Street to Warrior Way, not because I'm opposed to it. I'm a big supporter of sports. In fact, I am a sports official here for the high school and collegiate level in baseball and basketball. Some of you may have seen me. I'm also the Wasilla Youth Baseball umpire in charge. I train the umpires and everything. So I have no problem with the thought. I come here due to the hardship it will cause Cash Integrity Services. I come not just representing myself in Cash Integrity Services, but also the nearly 350 participants that call 777 North Cruzy Street their mailing address. Cash Integrity Services works with all kinds of government agencies, including but not limited to the Social Security Administration, the Department of Public Assistance, the Department of Health and Senior Services, and of course our court systems and our guardianship and conservatorship side. We have calculated that we would need to change at a minimum the address of 5 different agencies for all of the people we represent, and a maximum of up to 12 for some of our individuals. This is not going to be an easy task as it sounds. The cost to Cash Integrity Services on the administrative side would only cost us about $2,500 to change our checks, our letterheads, as well as our website and everything there. But the cost to our nonprofit and the man hours needed to turn in all these change forms would run about $60,000, we calculate. I don't know about you guys, but not a lot of small nonprofits just have $60,000 laying around in manpower and as well as bandwidth to be able to make this thing happen for us. We rely on the minimal fees that we charge for our services that the Social Security Administration sets for us, plus our minimal fees as a guardian conservator, as well as grantors such as the Matsu Health Foundation, as well as the Mental Health Trust Authority. Our agency is deeply needed for the vulnerable community that we serve. Currently, we serve 110 guardian and conservator participants. Cash Integrity Services is trying to lighten the burden that the state has for the Office of Public Advocacy Guardianship Division, and in some cases, or in case some of you are not aware of, a letter went from the director of OPA and the deputy director of the Guardian Division to the state Supreme Court saying they are basically on a 9-month moratorium of not being able to accept guardian and conservator cases, and I yield. I apologize.
And next is Mary Robinson.
Good evening, Mayor Ledford, council members. Mary Kay Robinson, also known as Randy Robinson, city resident and full disclosure, part-time on-call City of Wasilla Library employee. I'm here this evening to say thank you to everyone, even though I had the nice budget paperwork to follow. Thank you for all you do. Thank you to Miss Miller, because my head was going to explode. Really, truly. I don't know how you all do it. It's But in any event, I'm pleased to see that you're still carving out money for the youth court, as you've heard me say on more than one occasion. Honor our past by taking care of our seniors. Thank you for the proclamation this afternoon. And also invest in our future by helping the kids. So thank you for continuing to find the money for youth court. I believe my husband had something to do with helping start that, Scott Sterling. So I'm gonna be pleased to go home and tell him, honey, guess what? They're still doing youth court. So in any event, I also want to thank, this is going to be a little wide-ranging here. I was lucky enough to miss most of the bad winter we had, but when I came back, I was pleased to see that maintenance had kept up with the sidewalks to make Wasilla a walkable city. I remember years and years ago, Mr. Patrick Coleman appeared before the city of Wasilla and talked about making Wasilla a livable winter city, and I still have hopes of that. So I want to thank the maintenance crew for keeping the sidewalks. As a library employee and also an avid library user, they are right on the spot. I can't tell you how many times snowfall, and they are there within an hour shoveling the walks. So the moms, the kids, everybody, disabled people can access the library. So very thankful for that. Another thing, I want to thank the city of Wasilla and the borough for cleanup days. I got my bags and I did my 2 blocks of my area of the roadside trash. Ended up with 8 bags and went over there Saturday afternoon, and I'm very relieved because when I was on Parks and Recs Commission, I used to have to babysit the dumpster, and I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. So I just want to say that once in a great while, I think to myself, why do I live in this hellish backwater? But, no, just saying, because I'm going to come to why I said that. But 99.9% of the time, I am very pleased and very proud to live in the city of Wasilla, and I want to thank everyone for everything you do. Hellish backwater refers to the fact that I've been going to the school board meetings and testifying in favor of the First Amendment for freedom of expression. So, thank you for your time.
Okay, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify at this time? Seeing no one, then we will move on to the consent agenda. Madam Clerk, please read title of the items for approval under the consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have the regular meeting minutes of April 24th, 2023. We have one introduction, a recommended public hearing date, May 22nd, 2023. That's ordinance serial number 2316, amending the fiscal year 2023 budget by accepting and appropriating a safety grant from Alaska Public Entity Insurance in the amount of $3,300 for safety equipment for the Parks Maintenance Department. We also have another introduction here tonight with public hearing on May 22nd and May 24th, ordinance serial number 2323, providing for the adoption of the annual budget for fiscal year 2024 and appropriating funds to carry out said budget. Looks like we have 2 resolutions left for approval under our consent agenda. The first is resolution serial number 2315, supporting the 2024 Arctic Winter Games in the Matanuska-Susitna Borough, and resolution serial number 2317, authorizing transfer of funds within an accounting fund in the amount of $29,500 for the purpose of updating the 2018 Hazard Mitigation Plan. And lastly, one action memorandum up for approval, that's AM number 2316, contract award to Matanuska Electric Association in the amount of $36,000 for power service to the new Richmond Hills Booster Station.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
So moved by Councilman Johnson.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Johnson and seconded by Councilmember Sullivan Leonard to approve the consent agenda as read. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. There is no items under unfinished business, and we are on to new business. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First item is resolution serial number 2316, initiating the process to change the name of Cruzy Street to Warrior Street as proposed by Wasilla High School pursuant to Wasilla Municipal Code 1208-030, street name changes.
Okay. Is there,
motion to adopt.
Is there a motion to adopt? Resolution serial number 2316.
Rubio does.
Councilman Brown, second.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Rubio and seconded by Councilmember Brown. Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, no, I was under the impression in listening to previous testimony that this was going to the Planning Commission. Is that correct? So it isn't a direct approval tonight by us, is that correct? Okay. That being said, I think I do have some concerns in that being a small business owner, changing an address does have significant effort for a business. You have to change federal business license, state business license, city business license. checking account, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, it's not a little task to just simply change your mailing address. So I guess my suggestion would be, is there any way that we could create a sort of a street name that would not affect the real mailing address, sort of, and also known as, and then sign the road as a, Cruzy Street, that's the official name, maybe with a brown or a blue sign right underneath it, Wasilla Warrior Way, so that it would not impact the business or operations of the businesses in a governmental way, but yet would memorialize the fact that this is a road to the high school and the significant sporting events and things like that that the high school contributes to the city. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, a couple of questions, and I suppose this first one would go to the clerk. So this is resolution is to support initiating the process to change the name. Does that process have to be initiated by the council, or I'm just wondering, are we the ones that should be pointing this towards the planning commission, or should the planning commission be working essentially on its own? Because if we point it to the planning commission, it kind of implies that that's what we want. If you could talk to the process, please.
Through the chair to Councilmember Graham and Holly, if you want to pull up that code section to correct me, I don't have it in front of me, but it's my understanding that a road name change can be accomplished two ways. The mayor can initiate it, or the council can, and I believe the citizens can bring in a petition. But yes, what this resolution does is it follows the process in code for the council to initiate the name change. And per code, by initiating it, it goes to the planning commission. The planning commission then holds a public hearing on the matter, and then refers their recommendation back to council. So it's my understanding that at the planning commission level, they could vote to approve it as is. They could amend it. They could say, no, we don't recommend you change it at all.
However, the process to initiate it does not need to include the city council. You said it could be done by the mayor on her own standing, or through petition of citizens, and not go through the council, go directly to the planning commission, and the planning commission would make a recommendation. Is that correct, Ms. Wells?
Yes, that's my understanding as well. The one thing, though, I do think we have to be aware of is the borough's role in the naming, their authority in that naming process. Yeah, and so
Well, at this point, I'm just looking at the process.
And what the procedure ends up being, given their authority that's retained in that. So yes, I agree with you regarding the process for the city.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, believe it or not, that was all one question. My second question would be perhaps to Eric or to the chief. Cruzy Street, as it goes through Wasilla High, is no longer a street, as I understand it. It's a driveway. Is that correct?
That's the way I understand it. So it would be outside of our purview, if you will.
So if the Burchell School District said, hey, we're going to name that driveway Warrior Way, then they could do that, but it wouldn't be a change to any plating. It wouldn't be a change to anything. Is that correct?
As we don't control that, I believe it'd be as simple as that, but I don't know exactly what the school district or the borough would require to make that change internally.
Okay, thank you. So if I may comment now, as opposed to questioning everybody. So number one, I think this request from the high school is incredibly short-sighted. It's great that we have such an outstanding high school, and we've had such an outstanding high school for years, but you're now sitting in the gymnasium of what was Wasilla High School. Why don't we name this Warrior Way out front? Because that is the history and we're not taking anything away from the Cruzy family or from any family that donated the land, put in the street, put in the utilities on their own, okay, using their own funds and their own money, and now we're saying, well, you know, essentially the remaining Cruzy is now in her 90s and is not particularly worried about it. That doesn't change history. History is that the Cruzys came forward as pioneers in this land and contributed immeasurably to the success of the city as we know it now. So I admit, as a high schooler, I would look at this and go, yeah, that's an incredibly easy project. I don't think so. I don't think that's what high school is all about. I think high school is going out, talking to the businesses. I see a gentleman here from Meineke. Obviously, he's been talked to. He understands the process here. But how did we miss 16 businesses, you know, right across the street from the high school that we didn't talk to, that we didn't get input to, because we pretty much knew that they weren't gonna agree with us? How do we do that? So if the high school wants to go out and make a splash, so to speak, and memorialize themselves, I don't think, and I hate to use the word stealing somebody else's work is the way to do that. I don't think erasing history is a way to do that. I don't think trying to change history and push something to the back burner is the way to do that. And I would, number one, I strongly object to this, and I think there are projects out there that the high school could do. You know, for one, we've got that great water tower sitting up there on Robert Street. You know, let's paint that and put, you know, Home of the Wasilla Warriors. Let's have them do something where they're memorializing themselves by doing some work rather than by pushing some paperwork around. So I strongly object to Resolution 2316 on the grounds that it doesn't need to be initiated by the council, and on the grounds that it's just inappropriate. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Colleen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess I kind of need a history lesson in a different sense for tonight. If I recall, Principal Marvell was here requesting a change in Cruzy Street to be changed to Wasilla Warrior Way. And I think there were students that were in attendance that also voiced their opinion on that. And Councilmember Graham, if you can remind me, I know that you had asked them to go back and as a school and as students form and figure how they can present it back to the city. And I'm not pointing you out, I'm again want to do kind of the history here and the timeline of kind of, you know, what did the school do, what did the students do to gather to say, you know, this is something we'd like to really see in the community, not to erase the Cruzy family's name or their input and importance for the city, but how they felt and how they wanted to move forward to change it to Wasilla Warrior Way or whatever it is, and why. So if somebody could address that for me, I would appreciate that, because again, I'm remembering that the principal was here, students were here, and they were asked to go back to the table, figure out how it is they wanted the change, and then present it here, either to council or planning commission on how they were going to do that. So if somebody could give me that information, I'd appreciate that.
May I address that, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
So,
Sure.
Number one, Councilperson Sollien, you're exactly correct. But the history actually goes back a little bit farther than that. About a year and a half ago, the government teacher, I don't know what class that is, you know, came to me and said, hey, we'd like to look at changing the name of the street to Warrior Way. And I said, great, if you want some help on how to figure that out, how to do that, I would be more than happy to help you figure out how to do that and what the impacts are and how to make sure that when you do bring a project forward that everything is considered, that you've covered all or most of your bases, and therefore the council, or actually back then it would have been the borough making that decision because it was a borough road at that time. But, and I never heard back from them. For whatever reason, I never heard back from them. And then, of course, when Mr. Marvel came forward, and Jason Marvel is the principal for Wasilla High School, doing a great job there. And when he came forward, I think he testified during public testimony. And again, myself and Senator Wilson this time offered our assistance to help him with the process. I have not yet heard from Mr. Marvel or any representative of the high school regarding the process and how to go about that. But at no time did I say, yeah, that's a great idea. What I did say was this is a great learning opportunity for high school students to learn how government works and how government impacts the lives of citizens. Does that help?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Graham, yeah, that does help.
Thank you.
Actually quite a bit, and if anybody else can share information in addition to this, maybe Councilmember Rubio, since you're sponsor of this, I'd love to hear kind of your input too, if you don't mind. Thank you.
You know me, I'll talk anytime. So exactly what he said, that it is our job as council to initiate the process for these kids, for anyone in our community. And I just want the day for the public hearing, whether it needs to be at the city planning commission level for the public to come out and speak. Isn't that why we're all here? To listen? And so it's on board just to initiate this. I was under the understanding that this is the process to go so that it can actually get down there and it could be part of the public and people, both sides can come in and talk and weigh in and then make a decision and then initially come back to us with what they've come to listen to from the public hearing. So it just needs its day on the chopping block, as one would say, for sure.
Madam
Mr.
Mayor,
Brown.
for similar reason to Mr. Graham and to the public testimony we've heard so far, I'm not so much in favor of changing the street name, but I believe this is a golden opportunity for us as adults and as the city officials to give kids a lesson on how things work and to see him being able to propose something and see it go through the government process. And at some point, we will have to make a decision, yes or no. But they will see the process going through the full stages rather than we just here stopping at this level and killing it and them not understanding why it died and what they did wrong. This way, by doing the full process, we will teach them how government works and we will do our job. It's time consuming and it may take some thought on our behalf, but that's what we get paid for. And I suggest that we continue the process, and I hope the city council will vote to push this to this planning department for them to have those public hearings, for the kids to be able to participate, and then hopefully we will use our knowledge and experience to make a decision that is good for the small businesses, but also good for a learning lesson for the kids.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes, and following your comment, Mr. Brown, is it possible for us to move it to the Planning Commission with a proviso of no, sort of an ambivalent support? In other words, let the Planning Commission do it without necessarily implying that we are in agreement to it? Is that possible to do?
Madam Clerk.
I guess I would, through the chair to Councilmember Johnson, when I read the resolution, I don't see any statement of support. I merely see it initiates the process.
Yeah, I mean,
Ms. Wells.
the only thing that I would add is because it's a petition process, that does contain an element of advocacy when you're petitioning for something. But I don't think you need to include I think it can, as Jamie said, I don't think that it needs a statement of support. I think you're fine to leave that out, but it is a petition process, not just say a motion. I'm curious with it.
Further discussion?
Madam Mayor.
This is your last time.
I'm sorry, my brain is really working slow tonight. One other comment that I did have is I believe if we were to move forward with this, we as a city would need to budget for the signage changes. And this would include the highway signs at the main intersection. I think they're quite large green signs that go up over the stoplights. They're not going to be cheap, and they're on two sides, I believe. So it's just one of those things that we're going to have to remember that if this was to move forward, there is cost to the city. Thank you.
Is there further discussion?
Question, Madam Mayor. Just clarification to Public Works. Is cruising owned and maintained by city, borough, state, joint?
Yes, through the chair. So it is technically owned by the state, but is maintained by the city. So it was rebuilt by the state, and then maintenance was turned over to us. So I think Mr. Johnson is correct that the state would say, if you want to change the name, you owe us, you either buy the signs or pay us to install new ones.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm looking at the resolution, and at this time, I move to amend the resolution to delete lines 20 through 25.
Okay, Mr. Graham, are you making a motion?
Yes, ma'am, I move to amend.
Is there a second?
I have to think about this.
Madam Mayor, Stu, could you repeat what lines you wanted to delete?
Certainly. My motion to amend was to delete lines 20 through 25. I see an error. It should have been lines 18 through 25.
18?
18, 1-8.
Madam Mayor,
Mr.
could you
Graham?
give some reason why?
Is there a second?
There's
Is
no
there a
second.
There's no second.
I'm sorry, I thought the second. I think he had a second.
I'd be happy to give reasons.
Hearing none. Hearing none.
Okay, hearing none, the motion fails. So we are back to the main motion. Is there objection to the motion?
Object.
Roll call.
Thank you. Council, this is on, we'll do a roll call vote then on the motion to approve resolution serial number 2316. Councilmember Graham.
No.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Velock.
Yes.
Councilmember Rubio.
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard.
Yes.
The motion to approve resolution serial number 2316 passes with Councilmember Sullivan Leonard, Johnson, Brown, Velock, and Rubio in support. Councilmember Graham opposed.
And Madam Clerk, resolution 23-18.
Madam Mayor,
Madam Mayor.
if I could, is it possible, Madam Clerk, to talk about 2318 and 19 at the same time, since they are essentially the same?
If there's no objection from the body, I'll read them in together, and it will be one motion to approve. Both. Does that work for the body?
Is there objection to that from anybody? Okay.
Hearing none, I'll read them both in. This is resolution serial number 2318, authorizing the mayor to enter into a purchase agreement pursuant to Wasilla Municipal Code 528030B to acquire 0.97 plus or minus acres of land identified as Manny Acres Number 2, Block 3, Lot 5, located at 600 South Manny Drive in an amount not to exceed $85,000 plus closing costs for a water tower and well site, accompanied by resolution serial number 2319, authorizing the use of funds within an accounting fund in the amount of $85,000 to acquire 0.97 plus or minus acres of land identified as Manny Acres Number 2, Block 3, Lot 5, located at 600 South Manny Drive in an amount not to exceed $85,000 plus closing costs for water tower and well site.
Okay, is there a motion to approve resolution serial number 2318 and 2319?
Madam Mayor, I move resolution serial numbers 2318 and 2319.
Is there a second?
I second that.
It's been moved by Councilmember Graham and seconded by Councilmember Bealock. Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor, we've talked a lot about, connecting our water system with Palmer's water system in case there's some sort of failure either in Palmer or in Wasilla to maintain adequate flow of water to meet our needs here in the city. And this is certainly a step towards making sure that we have adequate flow of water in our city. But before, and I am going to vote for this before anybody thinks I'm just being negative Nancy here. but I am going to vote for this. But before I vote in the future to appropriate any money for development of these lots, through drilling a well or building a tank there, I would like to see Public Works investigate the 2 wells that we have near the train depot that we have there. Those are not usable as potable water or potable water, however you pronounce it, because of, I believe, the arsenic level is too high in there, but it is usable as non-potable water. And since one of our main concerns as the city grows is to be able to, as the city grows with the development of larger buildings and more residential facilities, is the ability to maintain pressure in sprinkler systems, fire suppression systems. I know of several cities that use non-potable water to provide pressure for their fire suppression systems in there. And since we've already drilled the wells, we already know what the water flow is out of those 2 wells on that property. Before I could vote for any money to do anything other than to buy this land, I would certainly like to see an extensive study of how we could use those wells so that we have adequate water pressure, particularly for the shops at Sun Mountain Development, which has a long way to go and certainly has a large need for water for fire suppression systems. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Johnson.
Madam Mayor, to Eric, I believe that one of the stumbling blocks for really moving forward, say with a large development, I think there was a proposal a while ago for a hotel very near there. I think the main stumbling block was that water pressure that basically killed the project. Is that correct?
Yes, through the mayor. I'll be blunt with you. The fire marshal has told us he will not authorize any more certificates of occupancy until we have better water supply for fire. And so while we're upgrading our pump station at Richmond Hills, which is where this water would be supplied to this future tank site, it is still at risk to a natural disaster, a once in 100-year failure of the system at the pump station where we would lose pressure. This water tower is based on gravity. It would give us the safety that we need, the redundancy that we need to provide pressure zone 4 with an interruptible water source. And so while the pumps will keep that tank full, if something were to happen to the system, that tank would provide that area with the fire water that it needs. To Mr. Graham's question about potable, if we use the train depot as location, I'd have to run a whole new line to get to pressure zone 4. So I'd be happy to look at what we could do with those wells and make them useful to the city since they're our infrastructure. But the way we do fire systems right now, it is a part of the potable system to buildings. So we run a large pipe into the building, They pull off a little bit of water for their bathrooms and whatever services they need, but it goes in uninterrupted so that there is nothing that fails in a fire to give them all the water they need. There's no valves, there's just a backflow preventer to keep the stagnant water from touching the potable system, but it needs all the water immediately when there's a fire. So we have to be very collaborative with the fire marshal to fill them with confidence that our system provides those businesses with the immediate fire services that they require until they even get there with their trucks to try to fight the fire. So we take it very serious, and this is a very important step to provide Pressure Zone 4 with the expansion that it needs for water for fire service. Thank you.
Okay, is there further discussion? Hearing none, is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. There are no items of business under unfinished business. We're now at communications. Madam Clerk, please read the titles of items under communication.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Item number 2310, monthly financial report for the period ending March 31st, 2023, to include the month-to-date expenditure report, disbursements greater than $10,000, the investment report, quarterly report of businesses receiving a penalty waiver for sales tax, and the auditor's report. 2 sets of commission meeting minutes, Planning Commission, April 11th, 2023, Wasilla Landscape Standards Review Committee, April 17, 2023.
We are now at audience comments. It's a time for members of the public to share their views with the council. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. Is there anyone present who would like to address the city council at this time? Please state your first and last name. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening again. This is Ann Kilkenny. I'm a city resident. I wanted to comment on a few things that I've heard this evening. One was in the budget presentation, there was a comment about the need for, I don't know the exact correct term, a reserve fund in the sewer budget to enable capital expenditures for expansion of the sewer. And I'd like to suggest that current ratepayers shouldn't be having to create that reserve. That if there's going to be an expansion of the sewer system, the cost should be covered by the new customers. Those of us who've been old timers, we had to pay for our extension to get on. I don't understand why when businesses get on, we all pay for them too. On the Resolution 2316 on the renaming of Cruzy Street, I don't quite understand why you guys didn't amend it, because I do believe that it will go to the Planning Commission kind of with the assumption that this is what the council wants. And if you turn around then and change what they have, I would feel frustrated if I was on the Planning Commission. And those of us in the public who have come to testify, you have just given us a good example of how government works. You have to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. We're going to be coming to the Planning Commission meeting to say what we said tonight. And I find it frustrating to have to do that. Why couldn't we have been heard and acted on the first time? But, this is the process, I guess. And I'm sure glad to hear about the $30 million that Senator Murkowski has somehow managed to earmark for us. And hope that credit is given where credit is due when this money comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilpenny. Is there anyone else? Hearing none, we are closing audience comments, and I'll bring it back to Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. let's see here. Oh, I do have an update on the microphones that you guys all approved funding for. We now understand that due to manufacturer issues with chipsets, estimated time of arrival now is May 15th. So fingers crossed for that. High school graduations, if you're interested in attending, Wasilla High looks like May 18th and Burchell on Friday, May 19th, all at the Menard Center, 7 o'clock. Memorial Day event will be Monday, May 29th, 1 o'clock over at the Wall, and I understand that's being hosted this year by VFW 9365. And then I did go ahead and schedule my annual performance review with the City Council, June 12th City Council meeting. So if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. And we will see you here on Wednesday night for our first budget presentation committee of the whole. Thank you, that's all I have.
Madam Attorney.
No comment, Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wish, Mr. Brown, I could say no comment, but I do have one short comment. I'm due to a change in the schedule with the Alaska Municipal League board meeting. I'm going to be unable to attend the budget meeting on Thursday, May 11th, and I would appreciate some reconsideration in rescheduling that, as that is an important function for me. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, I sort of agree with Councilman Graham. Unfortunately, I've got a medical issue on Thursday and will be unable to attend that meeting as well.
Councilmember Rubio.
I will be here Thursday. Just kidding. I love that people came out to talk today. I appreciate that. That is what the process is all about. I wish it was one and done, but what I've learned from here, it's not one and done. It is a process. So we just have to kind of ride that out and let the public do its part, and then bring us what they have come up with. So all in all, I think it was a great night for a turnout.
Councilmember Velock.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do also want to thank everyone for coming out, even though half of them are gone, or more than half. But I will also be here Thursday night. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to Representative Johnson and Graham. I will speak in your behalf on Thursday night.
I don't think you have enough words or something.
And Madam Mayor, I thank you for the Ola Alaskans proclamation. It was a good deed for some of us, even though one young person stood up there who shouldn't have been there. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Sullivan Leonard.
Thank you. Batting clean up here. I want to thank the audience for being here today. Mrs. Kilkenny, I always love your input. You have common sense, and you've been here a long time, and your sense of history is always very much welcome. Joan, I want to thank you for just a great presentation, really good budget. I'll look through it certainly in the next couple days and have more questions, I'm sure, on Thursday, because I will be here. Anyway, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much.
All right. I will be here Thursday night, but I'll also be at the AML meeting on Friday. So, on the meeting for May 31st and June 1st, if the budget is not adopted by May 25th, we will be canceling those two meetings because Crystal and I will be in DC. We are out gathering up money for the airport. So, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Ms. Kilkenny, it's good to see you. Ian, I hope you're learning a lot. Thank you guys for all of everything you do. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting at 8:35.